Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. For me, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I give my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, Carolyn here from We Teach Well. Today, we're going to be talking about the digital divide. While our focus is on how it manifests in education, it has much wider implications. I am joined by Dr. David Zinger, an experienced educator and fierce supporter of educational equality. Emma Enticott, a brand new first teacher at a rural high school in Victoria, and Pawan Lalwani from Language Your Way, a successful Edtech delivering English language learning programs to early education providers in China and India. So, David, I was going to throw to you first. As an experienced educator, you will be able to speak to the expectations versus the reality. So what do you think this situation has shown us about student access to technology, and what are the ramifications of that?
Thanks, Carolyn. Well, as your viewers can see, behind me is an illustration of the digital divide, and it's a chasm. It's a chasm. There's haves and there's have-nots. In fact, in Australia, according to the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there are 250,000 households in Australia that do not have access to the internet. That's quarter of a million homes. Those homes have children in them. And so we can assume from that those children are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, from people who are living day to day in different rentals, people who are living in public housing where Wi-Fi is not available, for example. So that impacts upon all learners. The other thing is that there was a very important study done by Pivot Education where they interviewed over 5,000 teachers across Australia and New Zealand under the COVID lockdown. And the teachers were overwhelmingly saying that the students who are disadvantaged in their schools, or schools that are disadvantaged, are suffering immense divide and in this COVID era. Sorry, I've just got a granddaughter in the background. Sorry about that. So when these teachers were asked, how are your children faring under COVID lockdown conditions, overwhelmingly 60% of these teachers said that our children are not performing at the optimal level, that they don't have access and they don't have success. And this is just more of the same. We've known this for forever, really, that our education system is full of inequity and we need to do a lot more to bridge that divide, not only digital divide, but just access to basic resources.
While it affects their school now, I'd be interested in your thoughts of what the ramifications are of this for down the track, employment, further education.
Well, long term, we know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds start school already behind their more advantaged peers. That's clear from all the research. Fundamentally, for example, children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds have thousands of words fewer in their vocabulary than children who come from parents' homes that have university degrees. And unfortunately, unless there is serious intervention, then those children never catch up. And that comes out in our NAPLAN results, for example, that the more funding that we've seen being pumped into independent private schools, that means that there's less funds available for public schools, and public schools educate over 80% of all disadvantaged children. So what we find is that cumulatively, by the time disadvantaged children get to year 9, they're sometimes 1 and 2 or even 3 years behind their more advantaged peers in literacy and numeracy. Yeah. And of course, we know the ramifications of that in future employment, that children who don't finish year 12 successfully, for example, generally speaking, earn millions of dollars less over a lifetime. They have worse health outcomes. They have greater degrees of incarceration in prisons. And we see that in the closing the gap, lack of closing the gap between Indigenous Australians and the rest of Australians as an example par excellence of what happens when funding is inequitous, when resources are inequitous across the divide, whether it's just digital divide or economic divide. Yeah. And of course, from an economic point of view, it's crazy because people who are not earning as much as their potential could be means that they pay less tax. They are more of a burden on welfare and costs the country a lot more. Yeah. So the more people that we are able to successfully complete year 12, go on to tertiary education or further education, TAFE, take out an apprenticeship, they contribute much more back to society. I mean, the work of the Economic Nobel laureate is quite clear that for every $10, for every $1 invested in early childhood education, we get back $10 more in productivity, in less access to social welfare, less criminality, greater health outcomes.
Yeah, it's significant, isn't it? Emma, you're a brand new teacher. It's your first year teaching, and you're in a rural situation in Victoria. From what I gather, it's not a particularly wealthy region. So what I wanted to ask is, first of all, did your students and staff have access to devices and reliable internet when we moved into the lockdown?
So that's an interesting question. So for lockdown, so I'm teaching in a rural area, and it is quite a low socioeconomic area in some parts. So in first lockdown, when it happened, our schools always had about 10 devices that we can loan out to students. That 10 was gone on day one. And then we were kind of stuck. Our poor IT guy was completely overwhelmed with broken laptops. Can we just get this thing working? And then obviously I'm sure a lot of us heard all about the government announcing that they would be providing dongles and laptops at the start of lockdown 1. So now it's lockdown 2, and we got those dongles last week. So we have a backlog of students who did nothing in lockdown 1, unfortunately, and despite all my motivation and all my calling and all my emailing and nagging almost. To please contact me. We have those students that are already at a disadvantage from lockdown 1 now going into lockdown 2. I guess the advantage this time is that we do have students online. We do have them connected this time, which is really a positive for me.
Yeah. I'd like to ask, first year teacher, how did your training prepare you for the reality of teaching in your school, and particularly in relation to technology, use of technology?
I guess I was at an advantage at that. I have always taken a great interest myself personally in technology and using technology to teach, and it was taught a little bit throughout my course. But obviously throughout my course, no one taught me how to respond to a pandemic. I was in an interesting situation though, just being young and growing up. I'm like a kid of the internet era. I was giving a lot of support to my older colleagues and telling them how to get online and how to record a podcast and how to log into Zoom. So it was this really interesting flip, almost like my expertise, whatever expertise I do have as a graduate, was seen as really beneficial to some of my colleagues.
Okay, so
Carolyn,
yeah,
could I make a comment on that?
of course.
And congratulations, Emma, for being young and enthusiastic and so on. It's fantastic. But what we have seen Australia-wide is an amazing effort by teachers, young and old, digitally illiterate and digitally advantaged, to overnight almost change their whole curriculum to work 24 hours a day right through their holidays to make sure that the children were able to get the best possible outcomes based on the resources available. And I think teachers are the unsung heroes of this pandemic, in that too often our teachers come under public criticism for being lazy, for having the easiest work life of all, 9 to 3, and 8 weeks or 10 weeks holiday a year. Emma's shaking her head, Pawan is shaking his head. I know when I was in the classroom for 17 years in disadvantaged schools, how much work we had to do outside those times. And I think that this pandemic has in some measure changed the public's perception of the work that teachers do on a daily basis. One of the first memes that came out after COVID Mark 1 lockdown was, God, if this is what teaching is like at home, I can't believe the heroics that teachers do every day.
Yeah, I was talking to another teacher yesterday about also about remote teaching and learning. And he was talking about the even further blurriness between your home life and your work life. And basically you were just on all the time. So Emma,
yes, I can attest to that. Most teachers are parents as well. And if they're working from home, they're both home learning their own children, and yet trying to look after 25 to 30 others at the same time. Totally unappreciated. I think it was, I'm correct in saying, in New South Wales, teachers were given a $500 bonus for working through their holidays to get ready for online learning. It's incredible how undervalued teachers are. And we recognise that when the teachers aren't available.
Exactly. So Emma, what sort of things did you need to put in place to manage students who didn't have access to technology, and how did you balance between preparing that work and then preparing the online work?
So I was really conscious in redeveloping my curriculum, or I guess developing my curriculum, because I'm a graduate teacher. So I'm first of all developing a curriculum and then modifying it significantly on top of that so that all my learners can have access to it. So I was really conscious in creation of my curriculum that it could be accessible both online and offline, which obviously comes with its disadvantages as well. So I wasn't able to use those amazing platforms that a lot of teachers were using. I did use Flipgrid there for a while, but my students really didn't engage with it. And then obviously I had some students that couldn't get onto Flipgrid. So I had to be really conscious in my decisions of planning. So I wasn't doing lots of planning. I had to make lessons that were available online and offline. One thing that I did that I found was super successful for me was creating 1 million Google slide decks, because if I had to, then I could just print them out and send them. Luckily, I didn't have to do that because Google slide decks use very minimal data to download, and they can get it on their phones if we had to do that. So I had to be, my choices were really, really deliberate and really, really conscious.
Cool. Pawan, what I would like to ask you, I've known you for a few years now, And your company, Language Your Way, you started with a small region in China. And over the last couple of years, that's expanded, and you're now working in India. And I wanted to ask you, is the digital divide apparent in other countries?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to acknowledge and kind of put out that point that we applaud frontline workers, and I would definitely put educators right up there. So I'd echo with the sentiments what David's mentioned, because that's something which is generally missed. With regards to the digital divide, yes, there is a massive digital divide. We started on in a small city, I think in a fifth-tier city. So think of it like rural China is where we started off our product. I was really surprised. This is way back in 2016, I think, where I was surprised with the infrastructure which was there. So we're talking about a school in a fifth-tier city, which is absolutely remote, having a smart board, free internet access in the school, which surprised me. Now, that doesn't mean that we were having tablets or iPads used in school, but it meant that the school had access to this facility. That was really fascinating for me, because I'd never seen any school in a remote area having that access. The divide is real in terms of one stark difference. What I've seen is we're talking about 4 years earlier, everyone was talking about computers, and when we were talking about the digital divide, it was always taken as a computer with internet access. What we noticed in China 4 years ago, it was more about getting cell phones in or iPads in a school. But when we're talking about early year learning, we were talking about getting smartphones in, and it was stark change, because if you see 4 years ago, we were yet talking about computers as a primary way of learning. We had actually raised a round of investment, and we were going for our second round, and we got a lot of knockbacks in Australia in particular, because the investors were not in favor of moving into an app-based platform versus a web-based platform. And one of the things is the way they were adopting technology and the access to technology. So that's true in China, where we're seeing, I think they have over 800 million smartphone users, with 80% of them having access to the internet. Now that plays a big part, and you have like your super apps like WeChat, which is your all-in-one. So it's your Facebook, your Insta, your Uber Eats, your Uber. So when you start looking at that, there are a lot of education aspects which kick in, and parents right now have been using WeChat as a learning tool in China. We have recently got into the Indian market when we're talking about from a globalization standpoint, where India has hit around about 500 million smartphone users. And now when you start breaking that down further, 80% of them, similar stats to China, 80% of them have actually access to internet. We've set up a team now in India, and what we're learning from them, a lot of them are not necessarily going to platforms. They are just using the smartphones, and parents are happy to use smartphones as a learning tool. So what we have noticed from one side of the market, they're at least open to learning, but from a school perspective, the infrastructure is not there. There have been a couple of good things for the Indian market. There have been a provider which has come and provided internet access to almost 80% of villages. Now that's a massive thing. And we're talking of a cost of 20 cents a gig, versus in Australia, we're paying around about $2 a gig. So that's changed in the last 4 years, which we have seen at least, from the India market developing. But one thing is constant amongst all of that, whether it's China or India, and we look at Australia, the infrastructure in schools is what's missing. So although the end users have access, and you might have independent providers like us going to the market directly, but when you're working with schools, that's a constant challenge.
You spoke to me yesterday about quality internet.
Yes.
Between other countries, China and India and other countries, and Australia. Can you talk to that briefly?
Well, it was more of an observation when we're talking about the speed and the costs. Like, it's very hard because of the population out here. We're not, from population wise, if you compare bigger markets like India, China, there's more volume covered. So the telecom providers actually can monetize way more when you compare it to the Australian market. When you have a cost of your data per gig so expensive, it actually limits the ability to actually provide it to the schools. What we were actually talking about, yesterday was the cost of internet data. Where I kind of mentioned India is playing at around at 20 cents a gig versus Australia at $2. And that plays a big part in the entire thing. And more importantly, what we've realized, especially in the Asian market, they're very open to technology, and that adoption where the number of smartphone users kicking in and the amount of people using the data has gone up, I think, threefold in the last 2 years. And it's just because of access. So I think when you're comparing to the Australian standpoint, it's slightly different, particularly when we're looking at schools and when we're going into regional areas. My wife worked in. I'm just going to. My wife worked in a regional area in Victoria, and we struggled because she had no internet access, and she was probably using the hospitals. She's a doctor, so we were probably, because she was in that proximity right next to the hospital. She was struggling because I think Telstra were the only network which would connect. Otherwise, she didn't have internet access, and when you're downtime, you pretty much have to figure out what you want to do. Start picking up a book and start reading again, I guess.
Oh, well, I would like people to do that. The English teacher in me thinks that's a really good idea.
One of the things.
A question for. Yep,
sorry,
jump in, David.
Carolyn, thank you. One of the things that we need to point out is that our internet, not only is it more expensive, but it's much slower than most of the countries, particularly the countries that Pawan is talking about, China and India. But I've done lots of work in Thailand, and Thailand is not a rich country, but their internet is super fast. Our NBN is actually a great disappointment. It's okay for those of us who are in the inner city suburbs who have got fibre to the home, but the majority of Australians, and in particular those who are living in communities outside of regional and urban networks, are using satellites for the NBN. And Emma's nodding, and of course it makes it really difficult to do anything serious over the internet. You just have to stick to the basics. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that even among schools, there was a difference in the take-up. So when you had lots of private schools who were very, very well resourced, they were able to turn around overnight. Every child had their home computer, had their fast Wi-Fi network, and were able to transition into home learning very, very quickly. Again, that exacerbates that digital divide.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the interesting thing there is I live in a city in Melbourne, in one of the suburbs that has the dearest land prices in the state. And I live in an old building that was built in the 70s, and we have the worst internet, I am sure, in all of Victoria. I have sheets and sheets of speed tests trying to work out why our internet's so dodgy. But sorry.
Sorry, my point, what I was trying to make was something along the lines of what David and Emma had mentioned, along the lines where what we have realized is, yes, there's a gap, and the schools are not getting the kind of support system. And, hats off to the educators for stepping up. Sorry for that. Hats off to the educators for stepping up in this particular situation where I might have to give a treat. Hold on. Sorry. Hats off to the educators in this particular stage where they've stepped up. So what we have been doing, and we've been pretty proactive right from the lockdown, is holding a couple of professional development sessions a month where we're going to the schools and actually giving them options that instead of literally only using a third-party platform, you could use the existing infrastructure like your WhatsApp and WeChats and use those as learning tools. Because that is one thing what we realized, that if we start waiting for platforms which can solve the problem. So yes, we all are talking on Zoom, and Zoom has become very big, but don't forget we had Skype, we had Google Meets, we had all of that sitting out there the entire time, and we didn't really have to go about, not every school needed to go about it. We could have actually started on really early. So that's one of the things we start off with. When we speak to the schools and we speak to the educators, we're not only trying to give them ideas and solutions on how to work around it, but we're trying to work with them. And these are complementary sessions which we're doing for educators, just so that they can, kind of building and helping the ecosystem at this point. And I think this is something we need more, and we need people to come up and step up and kind of help the educators. And I think Emma was pretty proactive to kind of work it out herself, what needs to be done, and kind of work out that amalgamation of offline and online kind of worksheets or workbooks which are required. But this is something I think all educators are just thrown in the deep and they need to figure it out. So it's more about the community and the ecosystem to come together and support each other.
That leads well into a question for all of you. I am a boomer, so I'm certainly in the later things, but I have a couple of Gen X, Gen Y sons who need to ask me for tech advice. And what I want to look at is the next generation, are they digital natives as we expect them to be, or have we seriously overestimated their access to and ability to use technology?
Can I start off? I find the term digital native abhorrent. Actually, it's very colonialist.
I agree.
And it's also ageist as well. The fact is that we've got people in aged care homes right now,
Yeah.
Zooming, FaceTiming with their families, because that's the only way that they can connect in Victoria at the moment. And the fact is that younger people who are brought up with a facility like digital social media have a specialization. They can work Facebook, they can do Instagram, but it doesn't mean that they know how to do a PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that they know how to code. That doesn't mean that they can create a website. They still have to be taught that. And anyone who can learn
Yeah.
if they're provided with the resources and the tools and the appropriate instruction to get them there. So while Emma had to get out there and teach the Luddites in her school, they were open to learning, and they learned very quickly because the need is there, and secondly, they want to learn. So the whole concept of digital nativism, as I said earlier, is a colonial construct.
Yeah.
It's a put down on all those people who were born before 2000.
Yeah, well, yeah. I had two people that, my business partner, long-term teacher like me, who was quite astounded that there were as many students in Australia who didn't have access to digital hardware or software. She thought everybody had it. And another friend, I was talking to her son's teaching down in Warrnambool, And I said, oh, can I get in touch with him and see if there's anything we can do? And she said, oh, yeah, no, they've got a pretty young staff. They'll be all over it. And that sort of thought of they're young, so they have all the answers in how to apply education. To me, that just sounded like we'd sort of missed the boat a little bit. Emma, what are your thoughts on the ability of all students, teenagers and young teachers to use digital well?
Yeah, I found it. I was reading Facebook last night, and someone had put a post and ended up on my feed. It was like, the school's telling me to work in a distraction-free space, but I am the distraction. So we haven't. Yeah, we got given one day essentially, both lockdowns in rural areas to prepare. So I don't think that we gave them how to work effectively. Do I follow my timetable? How can I be flexible with my timetable? They're all skills that, we didn't have any time to teach because we were too busy transferring our curriculum incredibly quickly online. However, I have been really focusing on the positives recently, and I actually had a really positive conversation with one of my Year 12 students, and I feel so terrible for all of the Year 12s this year. Like, what a horrible, stressful year to be completing VCE in. And I actually said to her, I'm like, I don't think you realise it now, but if you go on to university and you go into further study, how you're learning now is how you are going to learn at university. You are so prepared for further study. I know it's a horrible learning curve, but it's probably not the year that you want to do it. But coming to next year, you're going to just glide in beautifully because this is exactly what you're going to be doing.
Yeah. I think I like that you have stressed that, because it in some ways, and there was an article about it not long ago, that our Year 12s may end up being advantaged when they move into tertiary, because it won't be such a big jump for them. The question is, and if you guys have got any thoughts on this, it would be good. We have this thing called the ATAR. I don't know how you feel about it. I have my own thoughts. The ATAR is primarily a tool that it doesn't measure what you know. It measures what you know as distinct to what someone else knows. So it's a ranking tool. And that's what they use to get into university. How do you think we're going to manage that so that all students, those who are disadvantaged as well, primarily, have the same way of moving forward into what they want to do next?
Can I start off?
Of course.
I think it's very complex. The fact that the Victorian
it isn't time for the autumn foliage yet.
The Victorian government has decided to give compensation and standardisation to all students doesn't mean that all students have been affected in the same way. So giving all students a bit of leeway means that the disadvantaged are still disadvantaged, and those who are advantaged actually gain more advantage. Now, how will the ATAR be graded to acknowledge those children who have all the internet at home, have parents who are well educated and can assist their kids in home learning? How is it going to compensate for those children whose parents are frontline workers, or even who are just teachers who are trying to juggle both home learning, learning in the classroom, because we have to remember that some children under stage 4 lockdown and even stage 3 lockdown were going to school. To school. in the primary and secondary area. Those children whose parents were frontline workers, those children who were at risk, they were at school. And that meant that a teacher, as Emma pointed out, was not only teaching online preparing lessons, but also doing face-to-face teaching and having to cope more or less with their own family life. The fact is that Australia is one of the few countries in the world, in the OECD, that uses Year 12 results to judge whether a student is eligible for university progress. And it's what this COVID pandemic has thrown up is the possibility to just change what we call the grammar of schooling, to finally have a look at how universities in particular are imposing their will on the curriculum at year 11 and year 12 to do the work that they should be doing themselves. In the United States, for example, students have to sit an SAT, a test to actually go into university. And based on that test, they're able to apply for different universities on their level. So it's a university-run test. And it's time that we remove the year 12 from that nexus with university entrance.
And in America, that SAT is only one, the SAT or the LSATs are only one part of the package, aren't they? Because they have to apply directly to each of the colleges they want to go to. They have to write an essay as part of it. And there's another thing they have to do.
Often there's a portfolio. Often there's a portfolio of achievements that they've done through volunteering, through community work. If we took medical faculties, for example, as a benchmark, then they look at the students' ATAR, but then provide and compel the students to sit another test anyway. We are moving towards that in teacher education as well, where teachers have to complete a psychometric exercise, pre-service teachers, to see whether they actually are suited for the classroom.
Yeah. So in closing, I'll just go to each of you, starting with Pawan. Any last words of what you think we need to do in order to try and bridge the gap?
It's a tough one. I think my stance would be similar to what I said. As fellow educators, we need to kind of support the ecosystem. Everyone's been thrown in the deep, and if someone's found something which is working, like we can't fix the internet issue, we cannot fix the issue of delivery, of not getting the dongles and laptops earlier. I think what we have to look at the situation is, this is the reality right now. It's taken longer than expected. We don't have access. What can we do in the best of our ability to get from point A to point B? And it's a matter of actually, coming up with solutions and sharing those solutions with fellow educators. And it might work, it might not work, but my thought is give it a try, and share the knowledge. And, you never know, something might work and help someone else. And that would be your contribution as a fellow educator.
Thanks, Pawan. Emma.
I agree with what Pawan said. We can't fix the internet issue, unfortunately. It's not going to happen. In a perfect world, all my learners would have a connection to the internet. We'd all be getting online. We'd all be using engaging platforms. But unfortunately, that's not going to work. But I think what this pandemic has shown is that we have a real option for collaboration here. We have a real opportunity to have a global staff room, essentially. you know, I have an incredible professional learning network because I have connected with educators around the world who have helped me out so much with resources and ideas and strategies for engagement online. So I think that whilst this has been incredibly challenging graduate year, there are positives that are coming out of it now.
Thank you. And David, I will let you have the last word.
Oh dear.
No, it's fine.
One of the things that teachers had to fall back on was the old Australia Post. Actually preparing lessons and posting them out, or some teachers actually drove them around when they could, and gave them to the students in their mailbox. You know, it's very old school. But I'd like to just finish with an anecdote that when I was working in Thailand with teachers there, I did notice that the teachers were using the students' smartphones in a very positive way in the classroom as a learning resource. They didn't need to go out and get expensive iPads. All the kids had their smartphones, and yet here we are in Australia, we want to ban them from the classroom.
Yeah, that's always been a thing of something I can't get my head around. It's the one piece of technology that you can almost guarantee the students have, and yet we don't want them to use it. So, yeah.
No,
well, thank you.
I saw students, the teacher saying, get out your smartphones, get into small groups, and find the answers to these questions and discuss. Amazing.
Yeah.
Not
the
rocket
simplest
science.
things. No. And it's a device that the vast majority of students have access to.
Yeah. The other thing, if I could finish.
Yep.
During lockdown 1, a number of us campaigned on social media for the ABC to convert its children's channel to an education channel, which they did very successfully, but not going far enough. Can you imagine if Eddie Wu was online every day teaching maths?
Yeah.
If Emma was online teaching her year 12 classes, but not to her class, but to every class around Australia. You know, we have got some of the best educators, best teachers in the world in this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're not, and who are preparing fantastic lessons for 30 kids. Let's make it for 300,000 kids, for 3 million kids.
Yep.
Because every home just about has a TV, and the ABC is the only network that goes into some regional areas.
Yeah, and it's a resource we have to protect.
Oh,
so
definitely.
Thank you all. I really appreciate your time this morning and your thoughts and ideas. And I think there's a lot here that can translate to outside of the education sector. So thank you again.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Pawan. Thanks, Emma. Good luck.
David, thanks, Emma.
Thanks, guys.